A short 20-minute drive outside of Quebec City in a gas station strip mall is my favorite pastry shop in the world. I knew nothing about it. I hadn't done any research, but the moment I walked in, I knew it was going to be good. Perched on top of all of the pastry cases were mounds of beautiful meringue. As a byproduct of richer, more expensive pastry components, meringue is made with leftover egg whites. It was a signifier that everything in the artisan pastry shop was made by hand and from scratch. In this day and age, most bakeries buy their eggs in buckets and cartons in the form of whole eggs, yolks, or whites. The artisan bakery tradition is based on respecting ingredients. When there are ingredient remainders or leftover product from one day to the next, they are simply used to make something else amazing. A day-old croissant becomes an almond croissant, and egg whites become meringue. The term meringue is an umbrella term. If you whip egg whites and add sucrose to them, they become meringue. The ratio of egg white to sucrose determines how the meringue will be used. It gets confusing relatively quickly because there are variations in the ratios and the names of the different meringues. An egg white consists of 88% moisture and 10% protein. I compare the protein strands to fingers or your muscle fibers. They lengthen and eventually connect as they warm up and they grab onto one another. So temperature has a big effect on how the proteins behave. The proteins begin to connect and form a network, but without additional ingredients, that network will just fall apart when you stop agitating them. A stabilized egg white has something else added to it that allows it to create air bubbles that hold air, lock in the moisture, and stay together long after you're done whipping them. Meanwhile, sucrose is hygroscopic, which just means it seeks out water wherever it goes. Because sucrose is hygroscopic, it's always looking for water. At 88% moisture, the egg whites provide that water to the point where the sucrose can dissolve. As the sucrose dissolves in the water, it begins to become a syrup, a very thick, viscous syrup. So the matrix of protein is creating the walls that hold the syrup and the air, and the syrup is thick, so it creates an emulsion that becomes a simple meringue. A simple or common meringue is a 1-to-1 ratio of egg white to sucrose, and there is no heat applied. A French is 1 to 1.5 ratio, no heat applied. Swiss meringues are a 1-to-2 ratio. Egg whites and sucrose are whisked over indirect heat, such as a bain-marie, and once they reach temperature around 120 degrees Fahrenheit, they are poured into a mixer bowl and whipped on medium. The heat stabilizes the egg white proteins by warming them up so that they relax and create stronger bonds. These bonds hold the liquid and don't release it as easily. My favorite, the most stabilized and the most challenging to make is the Italian. With a great degree of practice and skill, egg whites go on the mixer with a whip on medium on their own until they're soft to medium peak. Simultaneously, in a pot over heat, sucrose and water and sometimes glucose syrup are brought to 243 Fahrenheit or between 117 and 125 Celsius, depending on your end goal and the humidity. Cooking the sugar to a high temperature removes a lot of its moisture, and the high heat is going to very delicately cook the eggs that are in the mixer. Once the sugar syrup is at the right temperature, it is gently poured into the mixer bowl while the mixer is running so that the egg whites do not get cooked, but they get heated. The heating stretches out the proteins, creates larger, beautiful bubbles that hold a lot of the viscous syrup, creating the most stable meringue of them all. Much of the water is cooked away and steamed off during production. There is a lot less to escape the matrix. Italian meringues are stable at room temperature for days. The common meringue makes a beautiful pavlova, and the Swiss is really great for piping cookies because it leaves sharp lines behind. My preference for a macaron is to use the Italian meringue. It's the most stable and gives the best results, but you do have to master the technique, and it can be a little dangerous with the sugar getting to such a high temperature. Egg whites contain 0 fat. Even trace amounts of fats will prevent your eggs from whipping. Just enough to make those protein strands slip past one another. You won't be able to grab on and make connections. White vinegar is an inexpensive way to remove trace fats from your tools and your bowl. The initial egg white and sucrose that you whip together is the ratio that you pay attention to. The ratio is not affected by what you add after whipping. 10x is commonly folded in because it has 3 to 5% cornstarch, which absorbs moisture. Moisture is so incredibly important to this entire process. If you use old or aged egg whites, they have less water in them. They've dried out. This makes a more stable meringue. If you cook out the water, you have less moisture and a more stable meringue. If you fold in dryers like cocoa powder or 10x, you are drying out the meringue and it will be more stable. You can see where I'm going with this. Yes, there are many different kinds of meringues. Some are crunchy, some are chewy, some are crunchy on the outside and chewy on the inside. Some taste and look raw and others look cooked like a marshmallow. So if you think like the ingredients, you will start to see that every decision you make will affect the final product. Adding moisture at any of the later stages is going to negate and ruin all of the work you've done up to that point. Baked meringue literally rinses off with water in the sink after you're done baking, and if you wash your trays every single time you use them, this will not be an extra step. Silicone baking mats hold residual fat. For this reason, you do not want to use them. I am making a bûche de Noël using a rolled pavlova. Mushrooms and twigs with cocoa nibs, sucre neige, and coconut sprinkled on them will make a whimsical, white, beautiful dessert. Think like an ingredient. If you attempt to make any of the meringues I've described, and I hope you do, read the formula, read through the method, and then think like an ingredient. Put each ingredient in its own category: protein, moisture, sweetener, flavoring, acid, and then think about what that ingredient will do in the recipe and to all of the other ingredients around it. A recipe means nothing if you don't understand what is going on in the bowl. Recipes are other people's creative work that can be replicated, but if you don't understand it, you won't be able to come close to the desired outcome. Think of the knowledge and power that you have now and move forward and try new things by looking at them a little bit differently. And if you find yourself in Quebec City, drive 20 minutes to Pascal Le Boulanger and give pretty much everything they make a try.